All right, well, let's call the meeting to order. Time is 6 p.m. This is a special committee of the whole for budget. As I call the meeting to order, this is a committee of the whole, so a slightly less formal meeting than council. I just want to acknowledge that we're gathering on the traditional territories of the Coast and the Straits Salish peoples, known specifically the Lekwungen-speaking people, known today as the Songhees and the Esquimalt nations, and recognizing that their connections to these lands and these waters continues to this day. Next, we just have approval of the agenda. I just note that we want to amend this agenda to allow public input. So if I could have a motion to approve the agenda as amended, moved and seconded. Thank you. Any other discussion on that? I don't see any, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. That carries. Welcome, Councillor Zelka. We've just started and we've just got to the approval of the agenda. So you haven't missed anything at all. I do want to just point out for the public, we anticipate this meeting because we're doing really an overview and sort of a wrap up of pieces prior. Will not take a long time. So if you're watching this on the live stream, if you go to the agenda package, you'll see a 1855 number. If you wish to address council, I would suggest that you call into the 1855 number at this time and hit the *9 to raise your hand. And then when we get to the next item on the agenda after the wrap up, or sorry, the overview, then I'll call for public input. And if anybody wishes to address council at that time, you can do so. Of course, if you're within the Zoom application, you can do it within the Zoom application as well by using the tool itself. We have no registered speakers or anybody indicating they wish to speak to council, but there's always that opportunity here for any member of the public to ask questions or address council. So I will be doing that at 3.1 after the financial plan overview. So there's no harm in just calling in now and we're doing the hand raise, and then I'll go straight to you once that overview is completed. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Mr. Payne, who is our Director of Financial Services, to provide that overview. Welcome to the meeting, Mr. Payne.
Thank you. Good evening, Your Worship. You're correct. Tonight has the chance of being a potentially short meeting, depending on any discussion that may ensue. What we have planned for you today is to go over the overview presentation, a bit more of a succinct version than that we've seen over the last two meetings. We've made good headway getting through the detailed information, so there's not planned any detailed presentations today. So the agenda today is to go over principles, the process and timeline, the overview, and tied in a bit to the budget questionnaire summary. I talk about asset management and reserves as we have at the beginning of every meeting. And then we'll wrap up by asking council to ask me to go and write the financial plan bylaw if council so wishes. So just going over some of the budget principles again that we review at the beginning of every meeting. We'd like to mention that the budget has been prepared using a service level approach. It's assumed that council wants to continue with its existing service levels, except for in the case where you've directed for us to change those service levels. We aligned our funding sources so that sustainable ongoing revenues are aligned with ongoing expenditures, and one-time expenditures are aligned with with less sustainable revenue sources, such as reserves. All the project budgets that have been in the 2021 plan have been carried forward if they're unspent and ongoing into the 2022 plan. And it is truly a 5-year financial plan. So it's expenditure authority that we're requesting for the full 5 years. We amend that plan every year. We adjust it by approving a new financial plan, but it's our best guess of what the expenditure authorities are needed over the next 5 years. And this is why we ask council to commit to years 2022 and 2023 at the very least in the financial plan, because we won't begin budget deliberations in respect of the 2023 year until partway through 2023. So we will have already began to spend some of the money that council has approved in this financial plan at the beginning of 2023. We integrate life cycle costing into all new services and new capital services in particular. There's only a couple new services being proposed in the financial plan. A couple of the big ticket ones would be the upland sewer separation It's considered a new service only because those pipes that we would be building don't exist currently. Although we do provide sanitary sewer and storm drain services in the community, it's an expansion to that. And then the other new service would be Carnarvon Park building, which would expand again our recreational services. So we integrate life cycle costing into the plan, so council understands the full cost of investing in that capital over the life cycle of use of that capital. This financial plan that is with you, it's version 2. It's on the agenda. It's no different than the financial plan version that was presented 1 week today, so 7 days ago. We intend on having a complete final financial plan version to council for our next meeting in March. And that's when you'll see some enhancements of the small errors that were in there. And the financial plan is prepared using a long-term vision. So even if there's economic impacts beyond the scope of the first 5 years, we try to bring those into the decision-making as it can affect the 5 years in the financial plan. So how do things appear in the financial plan? Generally, they appear through council-approved service levels. Just wondering if can you see my little thing on the right here? I'll just put that down. There we go. Yes. Council-approved service levels, council-directed initiatives. Those are particular special projects, and they relate closely. They align to the strategic priorities, as well as staff interpretation of actions needed to implement council-endorsed plans revision. So every meeting so far, I've used the Urban Forest Management Plan as an example of a plan that council has endorsed, and we take those objectives and translate them into dollars into the financial plan to carry out council wishes. We don't adjust service levels unless there's legislation that forces us to do it or council has asked us to do it. Public input is welcome at every stage. As the mayor mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, there's opportunities throughout the presentation to call for input through many different means. We prepare a financial plan as an entire financial plan, and that gives council and the community the big picture impact of their decisions, and then we work backwards. So if there's any changes that we need to make to the financial plan or refinements, then we make those rather than building it from the bottom up every single year. We ask for council resolutions to make changes, significant changes to the plan, and we'll mention all the versions as we go along. Timeline here remains relatively the same, except for we got through the operating and capital budgets quicker than we have in previous years. So today is really the wrap up. We're still determining the final date in March for the financial plan completion, but likely we're aiming for the second council meeting in March. That will allow us to finish a financial plan while integrating some preliminary year-to-dates from 2021. And then council can approve that financial plan and direct staff to go and prepare the bylaw that reflects the actual expending authorities outlined in that plan. And then we'll come together April through May with the bylaws for the financial plan bylaw, as well as the various tax rates and user fee bylaw amendments that need to occur before the financial plan adoption. So an overview for the financial plan, it authorizes operating expenditures to $230 million approximately, and authorizes $92 million in capital expenditures. So that authorizes our planned expenditures for capital. We expect that this figure may change, so it's probably something that will be refined in the next version of the financial plan. What I mean by that is the 2023 financial plan will probably see significant change to our capital year or our capital budget, just based on direction from council and the programming of our as we refine our capital programming. And as mentioned a few times, the engineering report that's expected in Q1 will outline our ability and plans to increase capacity for capital output in alignment with the Sustainable Infrastructure Replacement Plan recommendations. Of that $92 million, $19 million is grant contingent funding. The bulk of that is the upland sewer separation, of which the grant application was submitted yesterday, or actually I think it was Tuesday night. And then $11 million would come from borrowing and $62 million would come from reserves. Of course, this financial plan signals our desire to or recommendation to use borrowing for certain capital expenditures, but debt still would have to be authorized by council prior to us actually issuing debt for any of those capital services. And then $1 million would come from other means. So we just outlined for the community and council some risks to the financial plan that could see significant change for next year's financial plan or even in financial plan bylaw amendments throughout the year if necessary. The Sustainable Infrastructure Replacement Plan recommends increasing our capital output by 3 to 5 times over the next 15 years. And in dollar values, that could be between $30 and $60 million. So if we're able to somehow increase our capacity to that degree, it will significantly change the total value of capital expenditures over the next 5 years or 6 years in the next financial plan. COVID-19 continues to be a risk in many ways. There seems to be good trend with COVID right now, but we felt that way with Delta before Omicron showed up. So we really don't know what the future holds. There's certainly potential risk to our Parks, Rec, and Culture revenues, supply chain impacts, which impacts all of our operations, and of course, workforce capacity issues. The marina lease negotiations are underway, so we don't know how that will look, if approved. And then WorkSafe BC premiums continue to rise broadly in the industry and for other reasons as well. Inflation continues to be a concern to staff. As mentioned over the last couple budget meetings, local consumer price index seem to be relatively low when compared to the national level of over 5% annualized over the last month. But we don't know how that impacts municipal specific services. We're seeing significant increase in the unit price for capital expenditures, which is a municipal specific industry impact. And so that's likely not reflected well with a low CPI in Victoria. And then workforce labor shortages are making it difficult for us to deliver on all the programs that the financial plan authorizes and leads to work plan capacity issues. So overall, the plan recommends a 5.44% tax increase, which is approximately $174 to the median residential property. A median residential property would pay about almost $3,400 in municipal-only taxes. That's not including the homeowner grant, and that's not including other levels of government taxes, such as school taxes, capital regional district, et cetera. And these taxes would support a broad portfolio of services as outlined in the financial plan, in particular transportation, parks, recreation, protective services, which would include bylaw, police, fire services, drainage, urban forest, library, economic development, animal control services, and other services as well. So a good deal in my mind, approximately $9.25 per day per household to pay for all of those services. The 5-year plan has a similar forecasted increase over the next 5 years, 4.59% for next year. And we've outlined in this chart the various cost drivers for what those are. So council can, if council has an objective in terms of tax rate increases, those are the levers that are creating the increases as forecasted in the plan. So just to loop the financial plan and reconnect to the budget questionnaire. This year, I just wanted to note that we adjusted the timing for a lot of the work that we do to plan, and that I think that's resulted in quite a robust budget deliberation. I've benefited from it as the host of the information. Council will recall that we moved strategic planning back into fall. I believe it was in November. And a lot of the decisions that were made at strategic planning, they had a chance to be reflected in this version of the financial plan. So it wasn't necessary for in-depth discussions to occur during the financial plan process. Similarly, the budget questionnaire was moved back to October, and it also corresponded with the release of our sustainable infrastructure replacement plan. So staff were able to really tie all of those pieces well together, and it's demonstrated by how complete the financial plan is at this stage. So the survey ran from October 4th through to October 24th, a couple of weeks there, 3 weeks. And we received 280 responses. That is down from 2020 and 2019. Could be to, just speculating here, but could be due to our COVID-19 fatigue or other issues. I just want to mention, the public is encouraged to read the budget questionnaire report. It's published on our budget website, so it's right there with the financial plan and the quarterly budget report. So it's all bundled together. The budget questionnaire, it wouldn't be construed as a statistically valid survey by any means, but it certainly provides insight in terms of how the community views the services that are provided in the financial plan, or at least the insight for those that completed the budget questionnaire. So the budget questionnaire indicated that there was responses that had support for maintaining most services. So most of the responses indicated support for maintaining most services, and there was support for increasing 3 services broadly and decreasing 1 service. And there's mixed result for about 5 services. So I just highlighted those in the summary here. You can see that the services that receive strong support, and the way that we define strong support is if there's 40% or above, are recommended to increase that service. And these were those 3 services there. So mitigate and adapt to climate change, manage deer population, and develop additional new land use policies. The questionnaire also indicated strong support for 1 service being decreased, and that was install and maintain public art. And then there was mixed support for a number of services as well, provide areas where dogs are allowed off leash, regulate vacation rentals, regulate to protect heritage, provide road space dedication to cycling, and provide electric vehicle charging stations. So not as clear clear indication of what the community wants as a whole for those. And then the remaining services, which were plentiful, generally could be said that there was support for maintaining existing service levels. So the next part of the presentation, I'm just going to grab some water. There we go. The next part of the presentation, we just discussed again on a high level, some of the asset management that results from this financial plan, as well as the debt management and the capital spending forecasts. So as you can see by this graph, staff have estimated what we think the sustainable annual funding is and has been over the last number of years. And then where our funding level has aligned with that. And you can see prior to this council term, we estimate that we were funding 31% of sustainable funding levels. And this financial plan out to 2026 would increase that funding to 91%. Of course, what is sustainable funding and what is that dollar value? That changes as we refine our numbers. The pattern and the progress, I think, stays the same. But as we get better data, better capital projections, that number changes. And it did change since the last financial plan, but there was a clear trend that was maintained. As you recall, municipality, if we intend to fund any of our capital expenditures through debt, we must borrow through the MFA, and we must receive support for that borrowing at the regional district. And the other municipalities that participate at the regional district are jointly and severally liable, which leads to exceptionally low borrowing costs. Excuse me. Excuse me. Sorry. And because of that, and because of the MFA's ability to levy taxes on every single property tax property in BC, the MFA has been given a AAA credit rating by Fitch, which is the highest debt rating. And so the financial plan does forecast spending that's funded by debt. And so our debt servicing limit as a percentage of its limit is expected to rise from 2.3% to 5.3%. That's essentially $11 million in debt, $5 million for the Carnarvon Park building, and $6 million for the North Oak Bay Pump Station Consolidation Project. Again, staff would have to seek authority by virtue of a borrowing bylaw from council to take on debt. So this financial plan indicates council's desire or intention to take on debt, but the financial or the borrowing bylaw would actually authorize it. A summary of our financial plan of our reserves is included in here. We have over $50 million in reserves, and they're all allocated for different uses. And we've used that to develop our capital renewal reserve modeling from 2021 through 2026. And this capital reserve modeling, I wouldn't call it a forecast because the assumption here is that all of the spending that's authorized in the financial plan would occur. And we know that that doesn't occur. Normally we don't spend 100% what's in the financial plan. Circumstances change, and there's a lot of variables here that can change. But we just wanted to demonstrate what is the relative value of our infrastructure renewal reserves compared to what the demand is for our capital spending. And it demonstrates, much like the Sustainable Infrastructure Replacement Plan demonstrates, that we have a lot of spending ahead of us. We have a lot of assets that are due for replacement. And the reserve balance, although it may seem high, above $50 million right now, it doesn't meet the needs of what our spending should be according to the Sustainable Infrastructure Plan. So right now we have over $40 million in capital renewal reserves. So these are reserves that are specifically for replacing existing capitals, not the purchase of new capital. If we spent every dollar in the financial plan and borrowed $11 million in debt, that balance would fall from $40 million to just above 30 by the end of 2026. If we take some of the undedicated reserves, our accumulated surplus, which staff will likely be recommending in quarter one or quarter two, we could move those reserve balance up to about $50 million, which means at the end of 2026, again, under the same assumptions, we would have $40 million left by 2026. However, as mentioned a few times now, we are expecting an engineering report in quarter one that would demonstrate how we can fast pace some of our capital spending over the next 3 to 5 years, over the next 15 years by 3 to 5 times what our current pace is. And if that were to occur, we could see that our reserve balance falls quickly over the next 5 years. We put an asterisk there, of course, just to indicate that this is only modeling. It just indicates, again, our reserve balance and how it's aligned with capital spending. It's highly unlikely that this exact scenario would play out, but it's just modeling to demonstrate for that objective. Your Worship, that concludes the overview presentation. On the next slide, I believe I have the draft council resolution that I would recommend be adopted, but I'm sure there's some discussion to be had before we go there. So I'll stop sharing my screen at this time. Thank you.
Kevin, you're muted.
Thank you very much for that. Always has to be one in the crowd. So thank you very much, Mr. Payne, for that. And I'm going to just, I mentioned earlier to the public, if anybody from the public wishes to address council, if you haven't already, you can call into the 1-855 number. If you have, you can hit *9 to raise your hand. And that'll flag you in our meeting here to be called on if you have any comments or questions related to the budget. We will call on you. We'll leave that opportunity open for the next 5 minutes or so. I don't see any hands or indications from the public that they wish to speak. Ms. Williams, does anybody from the public, as requested, indicated they wish to address council?
Hello, Mayor Murdoch. No, nobody from the public has indicated that they wish to speak. We do have one member of council with a hand up.
No, I see that. I just want to make sure I get the opportunity. So if any members of the public, you can call the 1-855 number once we and then and hit the *9 to raise your hand. At this point, I'll come back to the council table and we'll take questions from members of council. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Thank you very much. Just wanted to ask through you to Mr. Payne, you made a reference to a work plan capacity issue potentially going forward. Could you expand on that just a little bit more, Mr. Payne? I'd really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Mr. Payne?
Oh, yes. Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Green. We made reference to work plan capacity early on in the budget deliberations. So the first meeting, we had a presentation from the Director of Strategic Initiatives that sort of indicated that we had quantified a lot of our work plans across the departments, and every department was experiencing work plan capacity issues to different degrees. And so what I'm saying in that slide is that the financial plan is a policy document. It's a vision by council to complete a certain programs, initiatives, etc. And so, of course, that is at risk if work plans are over capacity. So, you know, it's a risk that exists in most organizations, and that's what's meant by that slide.
Thank you. And just a quick comment, that would link back then for me to the HR plan and the HR planning, which I think I expressed some concern in one of our last meetings about that area in terms of the financial plan. So perhaps that's something that we do need to talk about going forward, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Patterson?
Thank you, Mayor. And through you to staff, I have a couple of questions, comments. One, Mr. Payne, on page 42, the gas tax funding is referred to as being very stable. And yet at UBCM last year, there was quite extensive discussion on the understanding that would diminish over time simply as electric vehicle use expanded and the consumption of gas and hence the taxes generated through the use of fossil fuels would diminish to communities. I'm wondering if any further information has been provided, perhaps through financial officers, as to how they should perhaps consider this line item on a go-forward basis.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Mr. Payne?
Thank you, Worship, through you to Councillor Patterson. And I appreciate the very long-term lens by which that question was asked. And what I'll say is that, you know, that long-term impact of gas tax revenues isn't contemplated in the 5 years in this financial plan. Nevertheless, point taken, that if we transition to the type of economy that we want to transition to, it becomes an unsustainable source of revenue. I do know that the FCM, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, has been very active in lobbying the federal government to replace the gas tax with permanent annual funding. I can't tell you how successful those lobbying efforts are, but I do know they're underway.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. On the life cycle costs that are start on page 113, I'm wondering if you could explain, they total, I think, about 3%. So could you explain how they're factored into the tax increase projections on page 36?
Mr. Payne?
Thank you, Your Worship. Sorry, just scrolling to the page in question here.
That's page 113 of the PDF, not the overall agenda package. No, it's clear. It's okay.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yeah, here we go. Okay, thank you, Your Worship. So the various items that have been highlighted in here have a different tax impact depending on and timing of that impact depending on the project. So many of the tax impact that we expect has not been factored in, only because the capital construction of it occurs in a year in which the operations wouldn't start until outside this financial plan. Carnarvon Park is an example there, where we've got the Carnarvon Park. We really don't expect the capital construction to occur in such a way such that the operations and the operational impact of it will begin in this financial plan. Nevertheless, we wanted to demonstrate what we think the relative increase will be required. And what would happen then in the financial plan is not only would we bring back the operating impacts, but we'd also start setting aside funding. Now, for the capital that would be funded by debt servicing, such as Carnarvon Park, debt servicing is another form of call it sustainable funding, but it's kind of sustainable funding in reverse. And so when you take on new debt, you have to raise taxes to pay for the cost of the principal and the interest. So those increases have been integrated into the financial plan, and they've been outlined in the tax increase chart very clearly. But what I would say is the ongoing operations has not.
Thank you, Mayor. Then, so just to be clear, the additional 3% then would be added onto future year tax projections.
Mr. Payne?
Through your worship, of that 3% is a factor to replace the capital. And since the debt servicing would be integrated, some of it has been integrated into the financial plan, but whatever is outside the debt servicing has not been integrated and would be in the future financial plan. Exactly.
Okay, great. That explains it. Thank you for that. Thank you for that information. The other, we've been doing very nicely on our investments, so thank you very much for the changes you made. It's nice to have a bit of an uptake on interest that we earn on the reserve funds. But I'm just wondering, because inflation now is, of course, it's a changing landscape very quickly, and so how do we monitor the reserve funds and the interest we earn on the reserve funds against the inflationary pressures that actually reduce the value of the funds in their purchasing potential?
Mr. Payne?
Through your worship, an excellent question. Now, we can compare performance inherently in the document. I wouldn't say they are explicitly compared. When we develop the tax increase, we include what I call a forced growth factor. That's essentially, for our purpose, inflation to the municipality, or at least how inflation has impacted the municipality. And that also would include the unit rate increase for our capital replacement. So assuming that, if we get to sustainable funding levels, that assumes that we're paying for our capital as we go over the life of the capital. If the unit cost of replacing that capital goes up, we need to increase the transfers to reserve. That's a forced growth factor as well. So what we can do is we can look at our forced growth factor that's published in the financial plan, compare that to our rate of return, and then you kind of have an idea. If your forced growth is 5% and you've returned 2% in your investments, then your real rate of return is negative. Which isn't uncommon. The municipality, the community charter does restrict the type of funds we can invest in. Mind you, we do have carte blanche to invest in the Municipal Finance Authority funds. The Municipal Finance Authority has started a new fund called the Diversified. I'm sorry, I forget what it's called, but it's a DMAC fund, and essentially they invest in equities on our behalf. We would have to take a cautious and policy approach to applying our funds there, but that fund has the potential to exceed returns that exceed inflation.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Okay, thank you for that response, Mr. Payne. one of the aspects of this report that I find really is something that perhaps was not as fulsomely elaborated at this time of the strategic plan or in previous years, and that really is the statements on the condition of the fire hall police station building that are on page 95. And so I guess now examining it at this stage, I know we have the new building that has been on the horizon for quite some time for Carnarvon Park, but I guess I'm questioning the rationale of having the Carnarvon Park building in this plan with the debt planned to actually construct that building, as compared to the condition of our fire hall and perhaps what I at least perceive to be a much greater need of accelerating the feasibility study on that building and the costs that potentially could be occurred should we need to undertake a new facility. So I'm just wondering about the rationale that went into this financial plan and presenting that to council.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. And perhaps, Mr. Payne, you could touch on the status of the facilities review process, which I know will inform some of those future planning pieces as well.
Thank you, Your Worship. My understanding about the Carnarvon Park and its place in our financial plan, it really comes from the Carnarvon Park master plan that was developed and endorsed by council. And so, as I mentioned in the budget presentation, how do things show up in the financial plan? Well, staff interpretation of plans that have been endorsed by council. That's really what's happened here. You have to keep in mind that Carnarvon Park master plan was developed before the sustainable infrastructure replacement plan was on the table. It was developed before the facilities master plan was complete, it's not complete, pardon me, but it's making good progress, and the results of that master plan will be before council. So ultimately, it does remain a policy choice of council. Staff have not deprioritized it. There's been no signal from council that that's what you want to do, and so it is potentially something that can be done in addition to the other work that is needed to replace our facilities and replace our other capital.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. Councillor Patterson, anything else?
Yes, thank you. Appreciating that. I do realize the Carnarvon Park building has been on that park's master plan for quite some period of time. But considering, I guess, at least in my opinion, considering that is not an essential service in comparison with the fire hall, and looking at the quite very explicit report that is in this financial plan about the condition of the fire hall and the recruitments that need to also happen that are presented in this plan. Certainly in my mind, I have a great deal of trouble considering we would place our resource, time, and energy into completing more of the work on the design and build of the Carnarvon Park building, as opposed to perhaps accelerating a review, using the resources to accelerate a review of the fire hall, which is an essential service. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. And certainly, I think my anticipation of that would certainly be that as that facilities plan comes back, we probably are going to have to rethink some of these priorities in the upcoming years. Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Worship, and through you to staff. I've a couple of questions. One specific and one more broad. I think I've asked this question before, but I just want to confirm with Mr. Payne with respect to reserves. And I've asked the question before about the specific village parking reserve. That those funds have been allocated, have been in that reserve, and then briefly were moved over to the alternative transportation infrastructure and then moved back for sort of administrative reasons, which I understand. Just want to confirm with Mr. Payne that, in fact, one of the accepted uses for the village parking reserve, that it does have as a condition that it may be used for supporting alternative transportation modes and infrastructure to encourage alternative transportation. Can Mr. Payne just confirm that?
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Mr. Payne?
Thank you, Your Worship, through you to Councillor Appleton. And I understand that I've been somewhat confusing about this over the last couple of years, so I'll try to be a bit more clear here. So the Local Government Act will allow us to use those funds, but there are steps that we would have to take to use those funds for active transportation. Essentially, the Local Government Act allows us to collect funds in situations where there's a development that cannot provide the required off-street parking. So we collect those funds, and the Local Government Act says, go ahead and use those funds for A or B, A being the acquisition of parking, or B being active transportation. When we collected those funds, our bylaw said we're putting it into the Village Parking Reserve Fund. So the Village Parking Reserve, right now it's sitting there in reserve for the acquisition of parking. I do believe that there is a method if council wished to appropriate those funds for active transportation, but it would have to be through the passing of a bylaw. So they wouldn't be immediately available without further council direction.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. Councillor Appleton?
Your Worship, so would that be and I'm just speaking theoretically here, but that would be sort of a potentially a two-step process to request of staff, firstly to examine the mechanism by which it would be done, and then potentially directing that it be done and debating that point? Or is the mechanism well enough understood that it could be something that could be proposed to be directed, and then staff would have a clear understanding of how that was to be done?
Mr. Payne?
Your Worship, normally I would say, a notice of motion directing us to look into how it could be done and bring back a report. That's normally how I would recommend it. Incidentally, on my work plan is to bring council a bunch of questions around our reserves. As I mentioned, we have some unappropriated reserves that staff are recommending get allocated. So I'd be more than happy to include that question. Or work with the councillor in advance to develop a notice of motion. It would tie nicely with that reserve review. So,
thank you, Mr. Payne. Councillor Appleton, anything else?
Fantastic. Yes, thank you, Your Worship, and I'll definitely take Mr. Payne up on that. Secondly, is a question more broad, and just seeing as how we seem to be blessed with a little bit more extra time than we would normally have during these deliberations. I was just during, of course, our budget deliberations for ourselves. The provincial budget has come down this week and Mr. Payne has probably not had a lot of time to digest it, but I'm sure he reviewed it with some interest. And I was just wondering whether Mr. Payne might be able to comment sort of broadly on things that he might have observed of significance in the provincial budget, and where we might take advantage of some new opportunities there. Thank you, Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Mr. Payne?
Your Worship, and thank you for the question. I won't have a specific answer, but one of the things that I was keeping a close eye on in the provincial budget was the mechanism by which the province intends to replace or refurbish, let's say, the climate action, the CARIP funding that we used to get. When that funding was removed, the words from the province was that there would be plenty of opportunity for those type of initiatives to be funded, and so I'm going to have a closer look in the provincial budget around those mechanisms.
Thank you. Anything else, Councillor Appleton?
No, thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you, Chair. I guess I have a relatively similar question. Nice segue with respect to the budget that just came down. I do note in the financial plan document on page 100, with respect to some of the engineering and capital works. The McNeil Bay foreshore erosion mitigation project in particular, I noticed in the budget that just came down that another $120 million will be made available to local authorities through the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund, amongst other funding granting opportunities. And it appears that some of those funds might be suitable or available for some sort of mitigation type projects to assist us with our climate change preparations. I just wanted to ask through you, Chair, whether it would. I know if we change the amounts of dollars that we're spending, we generally have to come back and redo the bylaw. But for us to apply for grants and those sort of things, which effectively means we're spending less of our tax dollars, will that also involve a change to the bylaw to modify this plan to spend less? I just wanted to ask a general question along those lines. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. In fact, I might ask that in both directions. I think both things happen in the course of a year. Sometimes we come up with new ideas that we want to spend money on, and how do we change it then? And what do we do in a situation like you suggest where we might be able to save some money? Mr. Payne?
Thank you for the question. Through your worship, if we needed to demonstrate that we want to spend less than what's authorized in the financial plan, I would say no bylaw amendment is required. Really, the financial plan bylaw represents the upper limit of what we can spend, and we don't often reach that upper limit, so that's not uncommon. And also, my experience with the grant programs is that they just want to see that there is secured funding for the other side of the equation, and that is accomplished with a financial plan bylaw in that way.
Thank you. Councillor Zalko?
Thank you. So just extending the point a touch further, it appears that we have a number of grant-ready projects, and I very much appreciate all the work that's already been done. I just want to confirm, will we be seeing some of the details of these projects, such as the pump consolidation project, before we start spending money on it? That's for authorizing here. Just want to confirm that, please.
Sure. Thank you, Councillor Zalka. Mr. Payne, what is the process in those larger projects?
Yes, Your Worship. So much like I'll use the municipal hall budget as an example. That was a project that it was in the best interest of council and the public to receive regular updates on it. So that's what we would do. That would be no different than any other major project or program. Often the director of engineer brings updates on programs. Also keep in mind, although the financial plan, and this is an important but slight distinction, the financial plan does authorize maximum expenditures. It doesn't authorize to go and actually make the purchase. So any purchase over $250,000, we have to come to council for approval. So that would certainly, the pump station consolidation, the fire truck purchase, all of those, they have to make its way back to council one way or the other. Typically, we have run a tender or we've run a competition and it's for final approval from council. But what we take extra care is to look at the projects where council will want input on the terms of reference for the competition in advance. So again, there's an opportunity for us to check in with the council at the right touch points.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. Councillor Zalka?
Thank you, and thank you through you to staff. I very much appreciate any opportunity for staff to remind us all of the basic civics and how government works here in Canada. Much appreciate this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zalka. I'm going to just take a moment as well to point out, because I went there the other day for a question that I had on work underway. The engineering department, for those watching, do actually have a current projects page. So if you just Google Oak Bay Engineering Projects, it'll pop up in the first couple of links, and you can go there and see the current status of. So that the question I had was on the work at the corner of Bowker and Cadborough Bay. But all of those projects are updated there, and you can keep an eye at this point on what's going on. It's rudimentary at this point. It's not it's not automated or anything else, but it provides quite a bit of information for people who are curious about timelines, delays, the scope, etc. So I just want to put that little plug in there, because engineering has made quite an effort to make sure that they're keeping that there for the public's awareness, but it's not always the easiest thing to find. Are there any other questions from members of council to staff at this point? Councillor Patterson?
Thank you. That saves me having to find my raise my hand button. Just a follow-up for Mr. Payne, to Councillor Appleton's question about use of the village parking fund. So another question along that line is, could that money that is in that reserve fund also be utilized to provide stations for EV plugins for village customers?
Mr. Payne?
Pardon me, through your worship, the broad use of those reserve funds are twofold: active transportation and for the acquisition of off-street parking facilities. So theoretically, you could purchase and construct an EV station off-street, and again, there's broad authority in the community charter for council to appropriate funds if council has determined that the funds are no longer needed for the intended purpose. So if council is willing at some point to say that about those funds, they can be appropriated for other capital purposes in general. But that's a threshold that has to be met, and again, would require a bit of research from staff before making any recommendations.
Thank you, Mr. Payne.
Yeah, thank you for that information. I think it is useful because the money that went into the reserve funds was collected from the village merchants. I think that it might be also interesting to have some discussions with the village merchants to see if something like EV stations would be advantageous and something that they would support. So, but it would be nice it would be very opportune to know that we actually could do that before we approached them. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. I think there'll be a lot of interest in that reserve fund document, just to clarify some of these rules. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Just very quickly, I think that we had a discussion with engineering a number of years ago about being able to tie EV plugins into the lampstands, I think. And I think there was some discussion around that. So that's not a bad idea, actually.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Are there any other questions of staff on the budget? I'm just going to call to the public as well, if they're just to Ms. Williams, if anybody, members of the public have called in and indicated they wish to speak.
Your worship, no, nobody at this time.
Okay, thank you very much. So with that, we have the suggested motion here for Mr. Payne. Perhaps, Mr. Payne, you can put that back up on the screen for us. Pretty straightforward. Maybe I'll get a mover and seconder, and then we'll happy to take any comments.
I'll make that one.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Thank you. At this point, I'm happy to take any additional comments before calling the question. Yeah, you're going to have to. Okay, Councillor Braithwaite, I saw your hand, and then Councillor Appleton. So I'm going to adjust my screen a bit so I can see everybody again. Go ahead.
Just a comment, just to say thank you so much again to staff for all of the work that they put into this. It was a joy to read. I think that all of us on council have come such a long way since the very first one. And I remember years ago having to sit around the table and go line by line through the budget. And this was a much more pleasant way to go through it. And so I'd just like to really congratulate staff on putting such a great document together and make it very accessible for the public as well. I think it's good to understand. And if people need to delve in a little bit more, they can always have those questions answered as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton, then Green.
Thank you, Your Worship. And just picking up where Councillor Braithwaite left off, I just want to extend my thanks and my appreciation to staff. The speed, I think, that which we can move through these documents and our ability to get down to those elements which are significant and recognizable as being important to debate is a credit to staff in the way that this is presented. So I'm not surprised to see things moving along more quickly than in previous years, just because of the efficiency of the way this is presented and the way that the material is out there. And I've got full confidence that the full plan presents the public with all the information that they would need to know about the financial planning process. So similar to Councillor Braithwaite, very appreciative of staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Yes, and I will just echo both Councillors Braithwaite and Appleton in thanking staff for the tremendous amount of work that they have put into this and to the format that they have chosen to use. As others have pointed out, it's a much easier document to read and to understand, and I think that really helps the public. I think financial plans are not nail biters usually, unless they're promising high taxes. However, I think in the end, this is a much more understandable document and format for the general public to see and read. And if they have questions, then ask. So thank you to everybody that was involved in the preparation and for Mr. Payne's leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Nay.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just to have my expressions of gratitude to all the work the staff's done. I guess what I would add in terms of what I found really helpful, Mr. Payne, is you would set us up for the discussions and you review and provide us with the context, big overview, big picture, and then start guiding us to the various aspects of the report in a very orderly and logical way. So I really appreciated that guidance and sort of supervision of the discussion. So thank you very much to you and to all the staff who helped to put this together. Very readable and clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nay. Any other comments before I call the question? I do not see any other hands up. I will reiterate, yes, this is a much more readable document than every year it gets better. And I really want to thank Council for all the feedback they've given to help guide that, and members of the public who have given suggestions on how to make this better. But ultimately, it's been staff who have taken those suggestions and made the document. I thought I would just, my other observation of this is I think, this budget, the last this is the fourth year of this term in terms of budgets. There's been a lot of focus, obviously, on asset management and that funding piece of it. And I someone asked me the other day about why such a focus on that. And I think one of the realities is as we look at some of the things that we want to have, as we start looking at building replacements and park investments and other pieces, when you look at that sort of total $1 billion approximately bill of infrastructure and getting in front of that and reducing the break fix work and getting more to the planned replacement side of it, if we're getting 10 or 15% right now, close to a third of our work time is spent doing sort of pull off break work or emergency work. And if we can reduce that even 5% over the course of the time, these are sort of the $50 million differences that we get in the budget. And I just, this is how this community is going to be able to afford to provide the high level of quality of service in future years, is to do this fairly foundational work. And, I'm very appreciative of how staff have been able to kind of take some very complicated concepts and be able to lay them out in this way, and to Council for sticking with this approach and tackling this both financially and plan wise to do it. I think it's very helpful, and sometimes it's not always that clear to the public about what the benefits are as we keep increasing taxes to address this issue. But this is how we make our community sustainable financially in the long run. So again, thank you to staff for making those pieces as clear as possible within these documents. With that, I'm ready to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? That carries. I guess at this point, we just need a motion to adjourn. Moved and seconded. Thank you, everyone, and have a great weekend. We'll see you on Monday. All those in favor of adjournment? Any opposed? Not too surprised. Thank you, everybody, and thanks for all your input. Have a great evening.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Good, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Payne.